The case that changed everything, when anonymous threats led to a billionaire's darkest secret. Detective Sarah Adams had seen plenty of harassment cases in her 15-year career, but something about the threatening note left in the Thompson family's mailbox made her German Shepherd partner Rocky's behavior unlike anything she'd witnessed before. The crude handwriting read, "Drop the case or pay the price," but Rocky's reaction suggested this was no ordinary intimidation attempt. As the brilliant dog's nose led them through a web of surveillance equipment, offshore bank accounts, and private investigation firms, Adams realized they had stumbled onto something far more sinister than simple witness intimidation. What they uncovered was a systematic 22-year conspiracy that had cost over $12 million and involved multiple families across 7 states, all orchestrated by a man whose public reputation was built on caring for disadvantaged children, while his own sons and daughters believed he was dead. The flickering glow of their second-hand television cast dancing shadows across the cramped kitchen of apartment 3B, where 11-year-old twins Sarah and Sophie hunched over their homework at a wobbly table that had seen better decades. The apartment's worn linoleum floors told stories of countless families who had called this place home, each scuff mark and stain a testament to dreams deferred and hopes carefully rationed. Sarah's pencil scratched against her math worksheet with determined precision, her dark hair falling across her face as she conquered long division problems that seemed easier than the real-world mathematics their family faced daily, calculating whether the grocery money would stretch until Emma's next paycheck, dividing their mother's love and attention between 2 growing daughters and 3 part-time jobs. Sophie, gentler by nature but no less intelligent, worked on her book report about heroes throughout history, occasionally glancing at the framed photograph that sat proudly on their makeshift entertainment center. The picture showed a handsome man in military dress uniform, his smile warm and his eyes kind, the father they believed had died serving his country before they were old enough to remember him. The apartment's thin walls carried the sounds of their neighbors' lives, Mrs. Rodriguez's evening novellas, the Johnson baby crying upstairs, and the distant hum of traffic from the busy street below. But inside their small sanctuary, the twins had learned to find peace in these quiet moments, when Hope's eyes spoke of double shifts and sleepless nights, but her smile upon seeing her daughters remained as bright as ever. "How are my brilliant girls?" Emma asked, dropping her worn leather purse beside the door and moving to kiss each twin's forehead, their daily ritual that had remained unchanged since they were toddlers. "Just finishing up," Sarah replied, not looking up from her calculations. "Sophie's writing about Dad again." Emma's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that only a mother's trained eye might have caught it. She moved to the small kitchen area, opening their refrigerator to assess dinner possibilities from their modest supplies. The television murmured in the background, local news anchors discussing weather patterns and traffic updates. Emma reached for the remote, ready to switch to something more suitable for family viewing, when a familiar voice from the screen made her freeze mid-motion. Tonight's recipient of the Distinguished Humanitarian Award, recognizing his decades of philanthropic work and dedication to family values. The remote slipped from Emma's fingers, clattering to the floor as her face drained of all color. On screen, in a pristine tuxedo that probably cost more than their monthly rent, stood Marcus Whitmore, older now, silver threading through his dark hair, but unmistakably the man who had promised her forever 12 years ago. "Please join me in recognizing Marcus Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries and founder of the Children's Future Foundation," the host continued, as applause thundered through the elegant ballroom filled with society's elite. Sarah and Sophie looked up from their homework, drawn by their mother's sudden stillness. The twins watched as the man on screen stepped to the podium, his confident smile radiating the kind of success that seemed to make everything around him glow with possibility. "Thank you for this incredible honor," Marcus said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Family has always been the cornerstone of my values. Every decision I make in business, every charitable endeavor I support, stems from my belief that we must protect and nurture the next generation. Children deserve security, love, and the knowledge that they are valued beyond measure. Sophie's pencil slipped from her suddenly trembling fingers. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mama, that man, he looks like Daddy." Afghanistan. He was a hero. Girls, Emma whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. But no other words would come. How could they? How could she explain that the father they had mourned, the hero they had honored, the man whose sacrifice had given meaning to their struggles, was very much alive and apparently very much wealthy? On screen, Marcus Whitmore raised his Crystal Award, the cameras capturing every angle of his triumph. "To all the children out there who need to know they matter," he said directly to the camera, "you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved." Sarah's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly, her homework forgotten. "Mom, what's happening? Why does that man look exactly like Dad? Why?" But Emma could only stare at the screen, watching the father of her children bask in applause for his dedication to family values, while his own daughters sat in a cramped apartment, doing homework by lamplight, believing he was dead. The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Emma sat frozen on the couch, her hands trembling as she clutched the remote, unable to turn off the television that had just shattered their carefully constructed world. The news had moved on to weather reports, but the damage was done. Marcus Whitmore's face was burned into all their memories now, impossible to unsee or unknown. Sophie was the first to move, sliding off her chair and approaching the framed photograph with the reverence she had always shown it. Her small fingers traced the glass as if she could somehow touch the man inside, the father she had spoken to in her prayers every night for as long as she could remember. "Mama," Sophie's voice was small and confused, like a child lost in a crowd. "This is Daddy, right? This is our Daddy who died saving people?" Sarah remained standing, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her young face a storm of emotions too complex for her 11 years. "That man on TV looked exactly like him. Exactly like him, Mom. How is that possible if Dad is dead?" Emma's composure finally cracked, and a sob escaped her lips, a sound so raw and painful that both girls moved toward her instinctively. She buried her face in her hands, 12 years of carefully maintained lies crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Mom, you're scaring us," Sarah said, sitting beside her mother in place. Smoke, acrid and suffocating. Sophie's face crumpled in confusion, while Sarah's eyes blazed with something far too mature for her age. "But you said he died," Sophie whispered. "You said he was a soldier, and he died fighting bad people to keep us safe." Emma stood abruptly, moving to their small bookshelf where she kept their most precious possessions. With shaking hands, she retrieved a small velvet box, the one the girls had seen countless times, the one that held their father's Medal of Honor. She opened it slowly, revealing the shiny bronze medallion they had cherished as their connection to their hero father. "I bought this at a costume shop," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days before your 5th birthday, when you asked why other kids had daddies and you didn't." Sophie's sharp intake of breath cut through the room like a blade. She reached for the medal, holding it up to the light as if seeing it for the first time. The cheap metal gleamed with artificial brightness, and suddenly the weight of deception was unbearable. "It's fake," Sarah said, her voice flat with betrayal. "Everything is fake." "No," Emma said quickly, kneeling before her daughters. "My love for you is real. Your father's abandonment was real. The choice I made to protect you from that pain was real." Sarah's anger erupted like a volcano. She grabbed the framed photograph and hurled it across the small room, where it struck the wall and shattered, glass scattering across the worn carpet like fallen stars. "You lied to us. You made us love a ghost." Sophie, meanwhile, clutched the fake medal to her chest and wept as if her heart was breaking, which in many ways it was. "All those letters I wrote to him," she sobbed. All those times I told him about school and asked him to watch over us from heaven. Emma pulled both girls close, even as Sarah tried to resist. I met your father when I was 22, she began, her voice steady now with the resolve that comes from crossing a line you can never uncross. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. He promised me the world, promised me forever. She paused, looking into their faces, Sarah's still blazing with anger, Sophie's streaked with tears. When I told him I was pregnant with twins, he said he wasn't ready to be a own daughters believe he's dead. The apartment fell silent except for the distant sounds of their neighbors' lives continuing unchanged. But inside apartment 3B, everything had changed forever. The girls they had been an hour ago, daughters of a war hero, proud of their father's sacrifice, no longer existed. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice carrying a determination that would have made her father proud if he had been there to hear it. We need to find him. Sarah, Emma began, but her daughter cut her off. No, Mom, we need to find him and make him answer for this. He owes us answers. He owes us something. Sophie nodded through her tears, still clutching the fake medal. I want to ask him why he left us. I want to ask him if he ever wondered about us. Emma looked at her daughters, her brave, brilliant daughters, who had just learned that their entire understanding of their identity was built on lies, and saw something she had never seen before. They were no longer just her little girls. In the space of one devastating revelation, they had begun to transform into young women with a purpose. The hours that followed felt suspended in time, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Emma had called in sick to her overnight shift at the hospital, the first time in 3 years she had missed work for anything other than the girls being ill. They sat together on the couch, Emma's laptop balanced precariously on her knees, as they dove into the rabbit hole of Marcus Whitmore's public life. What they found was both magnificent and heartbreaking. Whitmore Industries was a multinational corporation worth over $2 billion. Marcus owned homes in Manhattan, the Hamptons, and Aspen. His wife Victoria was a fixture in high society charity events, always photographed in designer gowns that cost more than Emma's annual salary. Their 3 children, Christopher, 28, Madison, 25, and Andrew, 22, had attended elite private schools and Ivy League universities. Look at this house, Sophie whispered, pointing to a photograph of the Whitmore estate. The mansion sprawled across manicured acres, with a circular driveway, fountain, and what appeared to be a private tennis court. Sarah's jaw was set in determination as she scrolled through articles about Marcus's philanthropic work. Children's Future Foundation, she read aloud, dedicated to ensuring he abandoned us. Sophie, ever the gentler soul, approached the situation with heartbreaking hope. Maybe he didn't know how to find us. Maybe he's been looking for us all these years but didn't know where we were. Emma's heart ached for her daughter's optimism, knowing it would likely be crushed, but unable to extinguish that spark of hope entirely. There's only one way to find out, she said quietly. Their first attempt was through official channels. Emma found the contact information for Whitmore Industries and spent 20 minutes on hold before being transferred to a secretary who listened to her explanation with barely concealed skepticism. Mr. Whitmore is not available for personal calls, the woman said crisply. If you have a legitimate business inquiry, you can submit it through our website. Personal matters should be directed to his personal attorney. This is about his children, Emma pressed, her voice trembling slightly. His daughters, Sarah and Sophie. There was a long pause. Mr. Whitmore has 3 children, and I'm aware of all of them. I'm going to have to ask you not to call again with these claims. The line went dead. Sarah grabbed the phone from her mother's hands and immediately called back. This time she was prepared. My name is Sarah Thompson, she said in her clearest, most mature voice. I'm 11 years old, and Marcus Whitmore is my biological father. We have proof, and we're going to contact the media if he doesn't speak with us. This time they were transferred to a different department, then another, then finally to a man who identified himself as legal counsel. Young lady, he said in a tone that was both condescending and slightly concerned, Making false claims about paternity can have serious legal consequences. I strongly advise you and your mother to reconsider this course of action. Then have him take a DNA test, Sarah shot back. If we're lying, it'll prove that. If we're not. The lawyer's voice hardened. Mr. Whitmore will not be subjected to harassment from individuals seeking financial gain. This conversation is over. Another deadline. Another door slammed shut. Emma watched her daughters process this rejection, their first real taste of how the wealthy and powerful protect themselves from inconvenient truths. But instead of discouraging them, it seemed to fuel their determination. "We need a lawyer," Sarah announced, her young voice carrying the case against him. The legal aid office was a far cry from the gleaming towers of corporate law firms. Located in a strip mall between a check-cashing place and a discount grocery store, it felt more like a social services office than a place where justice was dispensed. But the attorney who met with them, Jennifer Martinez, had kind eyes and patient ears. "This is highly unusual," Martinez admitted after hearing their story. "Paternity cases involving wealthy defendants are complicated, expensive, and emotionally draining. Are you certain you want to pursue this?" Emma looked at her daughters, seeing their future reflected in their determined faces. They had lived 11 years believing their father was a hero who died for his country. Now they knew he was alive, wealthy, and had chosen to ignore their existence. The choice between comfortable lies and painful truth had already been made for them. "We don't want his money," Sarah said clearly. "We want acknowledgement. We want him to admit we exist. And we want to meet our half-brothers and sister," Sophie added quietly. "They're our family too, even if they don't know it yet." Martinez leaned back in her chair, studying these remarkable children who spoke with wisdom beyond their years. "If we do this," she said slowly, "it will be a battle. People with Marcus Whitmore's resources don't give up easily. They'll attack your mother's character, question your motives, and try to make you disappear, just like he did 12 years ago." "Let them try," Sarah said, her chin raised defiantly. Sophie nodded, clutching her mother's hand. "We're not disappearing anymore." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that her little girls were growing up before her eyes, forged by betrayal into something stronger than she had ever imagined possible. "What do we need to do?" she asked Martinez. The lawyer smiled for the first time since they'd entered her office. "We filed a paternity suit and demanded DNA testing. We request inheritance rights and financial support. And we prepare for Marcus Whitmore to discover that his secret family isn't willing to stay secret anymore." As they walked out of the legal aid office an hour later, paperwork filed and their fate set in motion, Emma realized they had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the country. But looking at her daughters, Sarah's fierce determination across the courthouse steps, where protesters and media had already begun to gather, their cameras and microphones creating a gauntlet that the Thompson family would have to navigate. Emma gripped her daughters' hands tightly as they approached the building, their modest Sunday best, Sarah's navy dress from Target, Sophie's carefully pressed skirt and blouse from the thrift store, feeling suddenly inadequate against the backdrop of such grandeur. The twins had spent an hour that morning helping each other with their hair, Emma braiding Sophie's long locks, while Sarah insisted on wearing her father's fake military pin on her collar, a small act of defiance that made Emma's heart ache with pride and worry. "Remember," Emma whispered as they climbed the marble steps, "we belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let them make you feel small." But the interior of the courthouse seemed designed specifically to make ordinary people feel insignificant. The lobby soared 3 stories high, with ornate ceiling moldings that depicted scales of justice and blindfolded figures. Their footsteps echoed against polished marble floors that reflected the morning light streaming through tall windows. Everything here spoke of power, tradition, and the kind of wealth that could purchase outcomes rather than simply hope for them. Other families moved through the space with the confident stride of those accustomed to legal proceedings. Expensive suits, leather briefcases, and the easy conversation of people who considered courthouses merely another venue for conducting business. The Thompson family, by contrast, clutched their folder of carefully organized documents and tried not to stare at the opulence surrounding them. As they approached Courtroom 4B, Emma noticed the first sign of what they were truly up against. A group of immaculately dressed individuals had gathered near the courtroom entrance, their conversation hushed, but their body language unmistakably hostile. At the center of this cluster stood a woman who could only be Victoria Whitmore. Victoria was exactly what Emma had expected and somehow worse. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a perfect chignon that had probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Diamond earrings caught the light with each turn of her head, while her navy Chanel suit fit with the precision that only custom tailoring could achieve. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled Emma, cold, calculating, and filled with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something unpleasant discovered version of her mother, blonde and polished, but with an additional layer of cruelty that seemed to come naturally. She whispered something to her younger brother Andrew, 22, who laughed in response while looking directly at the Thompson family. "Those must be the imposters," Madison's voice carried clearly across the marble hallway. "My God, they look exactly like what you'd expect." Victoria's gaze swept over Emma and the twins with the efficiency of someone cataloging threats. When her eyes lingered on Sarah and Sophie, Emma saw a flicker of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps fear, before the mask of cold superiority slipped back into place. "Girls," Victoria said loudly enough for several nearby families to hear, "remember that anyone can make claims in a courtroom. The truth, however, requires evidence and breeding, two things that can't be purchased at discount stores." Sarah's cheeks flushed red, but she lifted her chin with a dignity that made Emma's heart swell with pride. Sophie moved closer to her sister, the twins instinctively forming their own protective unit against the hostility surrounding them. The courtroom itself was smaller than Emma had expected, but no less intimidating. Dark wood paneling stretched from floor to ceiling, interrupted only by tall windows that let in filtered morning light. The judge's bench dominated the front of the room, elevated and imposing, while rows of wooden pews provided seating for observers. Everything smelled of old leather, floor wax, and the accumulated weight of countless legal proceedings. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered precisely at 9 a.m., her black robes rustling as she took her position behind the bench. She was a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Emma had researched her extensively, 23 years on the bench, known for her fairness but also her intolerance for legal theatrics. "Good morning," Judge Hendricks said, her voice carrying easily through the courtroom. "We're here today for the matter of Thompson versus Whitmore, a paternity and inheritance dispute." Her gaze moved slowly across the courtroom, taking in the obvious disparity between the two families before settling on Sarah and Sophie with visible concern. "Before we begin," the judge continued, "I want to make something absolutely clear. This courtroom will be conducted with dignity and respect for all parties involved, particularly beginning to arrive." A small crowd of reporters had gathered on the steps, their cameras and microphones creating a forest of media attention that would only grow as the day progressed. The local news had picked up the story. Twins claim billionaire father, and the national outlets wouldn't be far behind. "Your Honor," Victoria's attorney stood, his expensive suit and confident demeanor marking him as exactly the kind of high-powered legal representation that money could buy. "We want to state for the record that my clients consider these proceedings to be a regrettable publicity stunt designed to extract money from a prominent businessman through false paternity claims." Judge Hendricks' expression didn't change, but Emma noticed her fingers tap once against her gavel, a small sign of irritation that gave her hope. "Mr. Davidson," the judge replied calmly, "we're here to determine the facts, not to prejudge them. I suggest you allow the evidence to speak rather than your assumptions." As the morning progressed, Emma realized they had indeed entered the lion's den. But looking at her daughters, Sarah's quiet determination and Sophie's gentle strength, she knew they were ready for whatever came next. Marcus Whitmore's entrance into the courtroom was orchestrated with the precision of a military operation and the flair of a Hollywood premiere. The double doors swung open at exactly 9:47 a.m., and he strode through them surrounded by an entourage that transformed the solemn courtroom into something resembling a corporate boardroom. 6 attorneys flanked him, men and women whose suits probably cost more than most people's cars, their leather briefcases gleaming with the kind of perfection that money could buy and maintain. Emma watched her daughters' faces as they saw their biological father for the first time in person. Sarah's expression was unreadable, her 11-year-old features set in careful neutrality, but Emma could see the way her hands clenched in her lap. Sophie's reaction was more transparent. Her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and confusion, as if she was still trying to reconcile this powerful stranger with the hero father she had imagined for so many years. Marcus himself was exactly what 12 years of wealth and success had made him: tall, distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that suggested wisdom rather than age. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, his posture confident, and his smile practiced in the way of someone who believes in the importance of our legal system and wants to put these false allegations to rest quickly and definitively. The choreography continued, as Victoria Whitmore orchestrated what could only be described as a character assassination disguised as a press conference. During the court's morning recess, she positioned herself on the courthouse steps with the skill of someone who had spent years in the public eye. The media, hungry for a story that combined wealth, scandal, and family drama, gathered around her like moths to flame. Emma and the twins watched from a courthouse window as Victoria performed for the cameras. She had changed outfits during the brief recess, now wearing a cream-colored dress that photographed beautifully against the granite courthouse steps, her jewelry catching the light at precisely the right angles. "This is a heartbreaking situation," Victoria began, her voice carrying the perfect balance of sympathy and authority. "A struggling single mother, desperate to provide for her children, has apparently convinced them that they are related to my husband. These poor children have been used as pawns in what can only be described as an elaborate scheme to extract money from our family." She paused for effect, her eyes glistening with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "My heart goes out to those little girls who have been told lies about their parentage and encouraged to believe in a fairy tale that simply isn't true. But I cannot stand by and watch someone destroy my family's reputation and put my own children through this ordeal for financial gain." The cameras captured every word, every carefully calculated gesture. Emma realized she was watching a masterclass in public manipulation. Victoria knew exactly how to present herself as the wronged party, while simultaneously painting Emma as a desperate opportunist and the twins as unfortunate victims of their mother's schemes. Meanwhile, Christopher Whitmore had taken to social media with the efficiency of someone who understood the power of digital narrative control. His Instagram stories showed carefully curated images of family gatherings, childhood photos of him with his father, and pointed captions about protecting family from false claims. His Twitter account became a stream of retweets from legal experts discussing the prevalence of false paternity claims and the legal protections available to wealthy individuals. Madison followed her brother's lead, but with a cruelty that was more overt. Her posts showed designer shopping trips, expensive his life. His testimony was delivered with the polished precision of someone who had been media trained since childhood. "I've known my father my entire life," he stated clearly, his voice carrying easily through the courtroom. "He has always been completely devoted to his family. The idea that he would abandon children is not only false, it's insulting to everything he stands for." Jennifer Martinez, the twins' legal aid attorney, approached her cross-examination carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, are you aware of your father's whereabouts and activities during every moment of the past 30 years? "Of course not," Christopher replied with a slight smirk. "But I know his character, and I know our family. These claims are obviously fabricated." "Have you ever heard your father mention the name Emma Thompson?" "Never." Have you ever seen any documentation suggesting that your father had relationships with women other than your mother and stepmother? Christopher's jaw tightened slightly. My father's personal life before his marriage to my mother is not something we discussed in detail, but the suggestion that he would abandon children is preposterous. Emma watched the exchange with growing unease. Christopher was smooth, articulate, and completely convincing. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who had been raised with every advantage and had never faced serious adversity. His testimony painted Marcus as a devoted family man who couldn't possibly be guilty of such callous behavior. The intimidation tactics were subtler but no less effective. During breaks in testimony, the Whitmore family and their legal team would gather in the hallway, their conversations loud enough for Emma and the twins to overhear fragments about publicity seekers and legal consequences for false claims. Their mere presence seemed designed to remind the Thompson family of exactly how outmatched they were, not just financially, but in terms of social connections, legal expertise, and public relations savvy. Victoria's assistant appeared to be documenting everything with professional efficiency, photographing Emma's modest clothing, taking notes about the twins' behavior, creating what looked like a comprehensive file designed to support their narrative that this was all an elaborate con game. "They're trying to make us feel like we don't belong here," Sarah whispered to her mother during one particularly uncomfortable hallway encounter. Emma squeezed her daughter's hand. "We belong here because we're telling the truth," she whispered back. Instead, he was prepared to use every resource at his disposal to crush their claims and destroy their credibility. The lion's den was even more dangerous than Emma had imagined. The moment had arrived that Emma had been dreading since they first walked through the courthouse doors. Judge Hendricks called for the minor children to give their testimony, and Emma watched her 11-year-old daughters rise from their seats with a combination of terror and fierce maternal pride that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Sarah went first, her small frame dwarfed by the witness stand that had been designed for adults. The court clerk had to adjust the microphone downward, and a small step stool was brought out so that Sarah could be properly seen by everyone in the courtroom. Despite these accommodations that emphasized her youth, Sarah carried herself with a dignity that silenced the whispered conversations that had been buzzing throughout the morning proceedings. "Please state your name for the record," Jennifer Martinez prompted gently. "Sarah Elizabeth Thompson," Sarah replied, her voice clear and steady despite the slight tremor that only her mother would recognize. "Sarah, can you tell us about your father?" The question that seemed so simple opened a floodgate of emotion that had been building for weeks. Sarah's composure cracked slightly as she began to speak about the man she had believed to be her father for her entire conscious life. "We thought our daddy died in Afghanistan when we were babies," Sarah began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Mama told us he was a soldier who died saving other people, and we were so proud of him. We had his picture on our dresser, and his medal in a special box, and every Memorial Day we would go to the cemetery and leave flowers where we thought he was buried." Emma could see several jurors leaning forward, drawn in by Sarah's honest recounting of their family mythology. Even Judge Hendricks seemed touched by the child's sincere description of a life built around honoring a father's supposed sacrifice. "We weren't sad that he was gone," Sarah continued, "because Mama told us he was a hero, and heroes sometimes have to die to save other people. We understood that. We were proud of that." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Then we saw him on TV getting an award for helping children, and everything changed. Everything we thought we knew about ourselves was wrong." Jennifer Martinez nodded. "Know if you ever wondered about us, if you ever cared that we existed." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, but she pressed on with the kind of courage that comes from having nothing left to lose. "We're not asking for your money. We just want to know why we weren't worth staying for." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma could see several people in the gallery wiping their eyes, and even some of the Whitmore legal team looked uncomfortable with the raw honesty of Sarah's words. When Sophie took the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted again. Where Sarah had been defiant and direct, Sophie was gentler, more vulnerable, and somehow even more heartbreaking in her innocence. "I wrote him letters," Sophie said softly, after the preliminary questions had been asked. "Every Father's Day, every Christmas, every time something important happened at school, I would write letters to my daddy in heaven." Her voice was so quiet that Judge Hendricks had to ask her to speak up, but the fragility in her tone made everyone strain to listen rather than miss a single word. "I told him about when I learned to ride a bike, and when I got an A on my spelling test, and when I was scared during thunderstorms. I told him I missed him, and that I was trying to be brave like he was brave." The tears came then, not the dramatic sobs of a performance, but the quiet, heartbroken weeping of a child who had discovered that the foundation of her world was built on lies. "I kept all the letters in a shoebox under my bed," Sophie continued through her tears. "I thought maybe somehow he could read them in heaven. But he wasn't in heaven. He was here, and he never wrote back because he never cared enough to find out we existed." Emma's protective instincts were screaming at her to rush to the witness stand and gather her daughter in her arms, but she forced herself to remain seated. Sophie needed to be heard, needed to have her voice registered in this courtroom full of powerful adults who were determining her future. "I just want to understand," Sophie said, looking toward Marcus with eyes that held no anger, only confusion and profound sadness. "I want to understand why we weren't good enough to love." The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma could see that the courtroom had been completely won over by her daughter's testimonies. These hadn't dared hope for. They had made their truth undeniable, not with DNA evidence or legal arguments, but with the simple, devastating honesty that only children possess. As Emma gathered her daughters close during the recess, she realized that they had just won something more valuable than any legal victory. They had claimed their right to be heard, to be seen, and to have their pain acknowledged. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this ordeal began, Emma felt like they had a real chance at justice. The morning mist still clung to the parking lot of Willowbrook Apartments when Emma stepped outside at 6 a.m., her nursing bag slung over her shoulder, and her mind already focused on the day ahead. The early shift at Metro General Hospital meant leaving before the twins woke up, but Mrs. Rodriguez next door had agreed to listen for them and help with breakfast, one of the many small kindnesses that made their modest life possible. Emma's routine was as predictable as sunrise. Check the mailbox, start the car to warm up while she scraped frost from the windshield, then drive the familiar route to the hospital, where she would spend the next 12 hours caring for patients who reminded her daily that everyone was fighting battles invisible to the outside world. But this morning, routine shattered the moment she opened their small metal mailbox. The envelope had no postmark, no return address, just her name written in block letters with what appeared to be a black marker. The paper was cheap, the kind you could buy at any convenience store, but there was something deliberately ominous about its placement, folded carefully and wedged behind their electric bill, as if the sender wanted to ensure she would find it, but not immediately. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. The message was brief, written in the same crude block letters that had spelled her name on the envelope. "Drop the case or pay the price. Your girls are precious. It would be tragic if something happened to them." The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her legs suddenly unsteady. This wasn't a legal maneuver or a media manipulation. This was someone directly targeting her children, someone who knew where they lived, someone who had been close enough to their home to leave this message without being detected. Emma looked around the parking lot with new eyes, suddenly aware of every Could they hide from someone with enough resources to find them here? And what about the court case? Would running away mean abandoning their chance at truth and justice? Instead, Emma forced herself to think clearly. She pulled out her phone and took pictures of the note from multiple angles, making sure to capture the envelope as well. Then she carefully placed both items in a plastic bag from her purse handling them as little as possible in case there might be fingerprints or other evidence. The twins were still asleep when she returned to the apartment, but Emma knew she couldn't leave them alone today. She called the hospital's nursing supervisor and explained that she had a family emergency. Technically true, though she couldn't bring herself to explain the full situation over the phone. When Sarah and Sophie finally woke up, Emma showed them the note with careful deliberation. She had learned from the courthouse revelation that protecting them with lies only made the truth more devastating when it finally emerged. But watching their faces as they read the threatening words was almost unbearable. "Someone came to our house?" Sophie asked, her voice small and frightened. "Someone knows where we sleep?" Sarah's reaction was characteristically more analytical but no less scared. "They mentioned us specifically. This isn't just about Mom. They're willing to hurt children to make this go away." Emma gathered both girls close, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with being their only protector. "We're going to handle this properly," she said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "We're going to call the police, and we're going to make sure you're both safe." Detective Sarah Adams answered her phone on the second ring, despite the early hour. Emma had found her contact information through Jennifer Martinez, their legal aid attorney, who had warned them that cases involving wealthy defendants sometimes attracted unwanted attention from people who preferred to solve problems outside the courtroom. "I'll be there within the hour," Detective Adams said after Emma explained the situation. "Don't touch anything else, don't go anywhere alone, and keep your phone with you at all times." The hour that followed felt like the longest of Emma's life. She and the twins sat together on their small couch, jumping at every sound from the hallway, every car door slamming in the parking lot, every footstep on the stairs leading to their floor. The apartment that had been their safe haven for a retired electrician who rarely spoke to anyone, but apparently their situation had moved him to action. "I can help you install it too," he added. "Spent 40 years working with wires and gadgets. Still got steady hands." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared shortly after with 2 more cameras and an offer to coordinate with other neighbors who had been watching the news coverage of their court case. "We look out for each other here," she said firmly. "That's what neighbors do." By the time Detective Adams arrived, the Thompson family was no longer facing their crisis alone. The small community of Willowbrook Apartments, people who understood what it meant to struggle and survive, had rallied around them with the kind of protection that money couldn't buy, but that human decency could provide. The note had been intended to isolate and terrify them. Instead, it had revealed the strength of connections, forged by shared experience and mutual respect. Emma realized that whoever was targeting her family had made a crucial miscalculation. They had assumed that people with modest means would be too frightened or too powerless to fight back. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The phone calls began that very night, precisely at 2:17 a.m., according to the digital clock on Emma's nightstand. The shrill ring cut through the apartment's silence like a knife, jolting her from the light, anxious sleep that had replaced her usual rest since receiving the threatening note. Emma fumbled for the handset, her heart already racing with the certainty that nothing good ever came from calls at this hour. "Hello," she whispered, trying not to wake the twins who were sleeping in her bed. She hadn't been able to bear the thought of them being alone in their room after the day's events. Heavy breathing filled the line, deliberate and menacing. Then a voice, distorted and barely above a whisper. "You should have listened to the warning." The line went dead, leaving Emma staring at the phone in the darkness. 20 minutes later, it rang again. This time the voice was different, but the message was similar. "Your daughters are beautiful when they sleep." Emma's blood turned to ice. She immediately checked the locks on all doors and windows, then spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair by the front door, baseball bat in hand, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was trying to enter their home. The pattern continued, jumped at unexpected sounds, and had started having nightmares about strangers in their apartment. Sarah had become hypervigilant, constantly checking windows and doors, her 11-year-old shoulders carrying the weight of adult fears. The black SUV appeared on the third day. Emma first noticed it when she was walking the twins to school, a large, expensive vehicle with tinted windows parked across the street from their apartment building. At first, she assumed it belonged to someone visiting the complex, but when she saw the same vehicle parked near Riverside Elementary during pickup time, her anxiety spiked into genuine fear. "Mom," Sarah said quietly as they walked home from school, "that same car was there this morning when we left." Emma's protective instincts flared. She changed their route home, taking a longer path through the residential neighborhood that would make it difficult for the SUV to follow without being obvious. But when they reached their street, the vehicle was already there, parked in a different spot but clearly the same car. The intimidation escalated beyond mere surveillance. Emma discovered her car tires had been slashed when she arrived for her evening shift at Metro General Hospital. All 4 tires were flat, cut with surgical precision that suggested professional work rather than random vandalism. The parking lot security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that evening, according to the security guard who seemed genuinely apologetic about the technical difficulties. "Weird how that happens sometimes," the guard said, but his eyes avoided Emma's gaze. "Equipment failures right when you need them most." Emma realized that whoever was behind this campaign had resources sufficient to compromise hospital security systems or personnel. The scope of the intimidation was expanding beyond simple scare tactics into something far more sophisticated and dangerous. The messages at her workplace became more specific and more chilling. A note tucked into her work locker read, "Accidents happen to curious children. School playgrounds can be dangerous places." Another, found taped to her car windshield after the tire incident, contained photographs of the twins walking to school, their faces clearly visible, the images taken from close range. The psychological impact was exactly what the perpetrators intended. Emma found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, varying their routes to school, and jumping at shadows. The twins' teachers began reporting that Sarah and Sophie seemed hands tightened on the phone. What kind of questions? They wanted to know the girls' exact class schedules, what time they arrived and left each day, whether they walked home alone or with other children. When our secretary told them that all media requests had to go through you first, they became insistent, almost aggressive. The principal paused, then continued with obvious concern. "Miss Thompson, our security cameras caught these men walking around the school perimeter, taking photographs of the playground areas and exit points. That's not normal behavior for journalists. We've banned them from school property, but I wanted you to be aware." Emma realized that their situation had escalated beyond intimidation into active surveillance and potential planning for something far worse. The people behind this campaign weren't just trying to scare them anymore. They were gathering intelligence about her daughter's vulnerabilities and daily patterns. That evening, Emma made a decision that went against every instinct she had about maintaining their normal lives. She picked up the twins early from their after-school program and drove directly to her sister's house across town, taking a deliberately circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed. "We're going to stay with Aunt Linda for a few days," she told Sarah and Sophie, trying to keep her voice calm, despite the fear that was consuming her. "Because of the people watching us?" Sophie asked, her young voice heavy with understanding beyond her years. Emma nodded, no longer able to pretend that everything was fine. "Because I need to know you're both completely safe while we figure out how to stop this." As they packed overnight bags, Emma realized that whoever was orchestrating this campaign of intimidation had achieved part of their goal. They had forced her family into hiding, disrupted their lives, and created an atmosphere of fear that was affecting every aspect of their daily existence. But they had also made a crucial mistake. In their efforts to intimidate the Thompson family into submission, they had provided evidence of a coordinated campaign that went far beyond the legal dispute over paternity. They had revealed the existence of resources and organization that suggested connections to people with significant power and influence. Emma knew it was time to stop reacting to the intimidation and start fighting back. But first, she needed help from someone with the expertise and authority to take on adversaries this sophisticated. Was exactly what Emma had hoped for when Jennifer Martinez recommended her. A woman in her early 40s with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a blazer that managed to look both professional and approachable. But it was her eyes that gave Emma the first real sense of hope she'd felt in days, sharp, intelligent, and filled with the kind of determination that came from years of seeing injustice and refusing to accept it. "Miss Thompson," Adams said as Emma opened the door, "I'm Detective Sarah Adams, and this is my partner, Rocky." The German shepherd's tail wagged once, but his attention remained focused on the surroundings, his training evident in every movement. Emma invited them into Linda's modest living room, where Sarah and Sophie sat curled together on the couch, their faces showing the strain of the past several days. Rocky immediately moved toward the twins, his demeanor shifting from alert professional to gentle companion as he seemed to sense their distress. "Is it okay if Rocky says hello?" Adams asked, noting the children's interest in her four-legged partner. "He's very good with kids, and sometimes it helps to have a friendly face when we're talking about scary stuff." Both girls nodded eagerly, and Rocky approached them with the careful gentleness of a dog trained to work with trauma victims. Within moments, Sophie was scratching behind his ears, while Sarah marveled at his size and obvious intelligence. Detective Adams settled into a chair across from them, pulling out a small notebook and digital recorder. "Before we start, I want you all to know that I take these kinds of cases very seriously. When someone targets children, for any reason, they have my complete attention and the full resources of the police department." She paused, her eyes moving between Emma and the twins. "I've been a detective for 15 years, and I've worked cases involving intimidation, stalking, and harassment. What you've described to me over the phone has all the hallmarks of a professional operation, which tells me we're dealing with people who have significant resources and experience." Emma felt a mixture of validation and fear at Adams' assessment. "So you believe us? You don't think we're overreacting?" "Miss Thompson, coordinated surveillance, specific information about your children's routines, and escalating threats are not the work of random. Has been following us for 3 days. It's always in different places, but it's the same car. The windows are too dark to see inside, but someone is always watching us." Sophie nodded, adding, "And the phone calls wake us up at night. Mama tries to answer them quietly, but we can hear her getting scared." Adams made careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification about times, locations, and specific details. Emma was struck by the detective's ability to gather information while making the twins feel heard and believed, rather than interrogated. Rocky, meanwhile, had positioned himself between the couch and the front door, his body language alert but not agitated. Adams noticed Emma watching her partner and explained, "Rocky has specialized training in evidence detection and threat assessment. He's already picked up on the fact that you're all genuinely frightened, not just anxious or upset. Dogs can sense genuine fear versus manufactured drama." The detective's assessment of their situation was both reassuring and sobering. "What you're experiencing goes far beyond simple legal intimidation. This level of surveillance and coordination suggests involvement by people with access to private investigation resources, possibly even connections to law enforcement or security services." Emma's heart sank. "Are you saying the police might be involved in this?" "I'm saying that whoever is behind this has professional-level capabilities," Adams clarified. "That could mean private investigators, security firms, or people with law enforcement backgrounds working in the private sector. The good news is that professional operations leave professional evidence trails." Adams explained her plan for protecting the family while building a case against their tormentors. "First, we establish a security perimeter around your daily activities. I'll coordinate with school security, hospital security, and local patrol units to increase visibility and response times in areas where you spend time. She pulled out several business cards and contact numbers. Second, we document everything. Every call, every sighting of the SUV, every suspicious person or incident gets reported immediately to me personally. I want to build a comprehensive timeline of this harassment campaign. Rocky's behavior during the interview provided its own form of evidence. Adams explained that her partner had been trained to detect stress chemicals and fear pheromones that humans couldn't consciously prevent. Disputes with wealthy defendants. Adams leaned forward, her expression serious but determined. Miss Thompson, I want you to understand something. Whoever is doing this has made a serious mistake. They've escalated from legal intimidation to criminal behavior. That gives us tools and resources we can use against them. She stood to leave, but turned back with one final reassurance. Starting tonight, you'll have increased patrol coverage in this neighborhood. Tomorrow, we begin active surveillance of the people who think they're hunting you. It's time to turn the tables. As Adams and Rocky prepared to leave, the detective knelt down to speak directly to Sarah and Sophie one more time. I know you're scared, and that's completely normal. But I want you to know that there are a lot of people, police officers, prosecutors, and good citizens, who won't let anyone hurt children to cover up their own wrongdoing. Rocky approached the twins one final time, his gentle demeanor providing comfort that words alone couldn't offer. Sophie hugged the big dog around his neck while Sarah scratched his ears, both girls finding a moment of peace in his steady, protective presence. After they left, Emma realized that the dynamic of their situation had fundamentally changed. They were no longer isolated victims reacting to an unknown threat. They now had professional allies with the expertise and authority to fight back against whoever was trying to terrorize them into silence. The shadows were still there, but now Emma knew that someone equally skilled was watching the watchers. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Willowbrook Apartments as Detective Sarah Adams and Rocky began their methodical examination of the Thompson family's living situation. Rocky was no ordinary police dog. His specialized training in evidence detection had made him legendary within the department, with an ability to identify scent signatures that had solved cases other investigators had given up on as hopeless. Adams watched with professional admiration as Rocky began his work. The German Shepherd's approach to investigation was both systematic and intuitive, his powerful nose capable of detecting trace evidence that the most sophisticated laboratory equipment might miss. His partnership with Adams had developed over 4 years into something that transcended typical handler-dog relationships. They communicated through subtle signals and shared understanding that made them one of the most effective investigative teams in the city. Subtle signatures left by human contact. Skin oils, traces of cologne or soap, even the residual scents from the environment where the note had been written. Within minutes, Rocky's body language indicated he had isolated at least 3 distinct scent profiles from the threatening note. His ears perked forward and his tail remained still, signals that Adams recognized as confirmation that multiple people had handled this piece of evidence. This wasn't the work of a single disturbed individual, but rather a coordinated effort involving several participants. Multiple perps, Adams murmured, making notes in her investigation log. Professional operation confirmed. Rocky's investigation of the apartment building's perimeter revealed disturbing evidence of just how thoroughly the Thompson family had been surveilled. The dog's systematic sweep of the parking lot, walkways, and common areas uncovered scent trails that painted a picture of sustained observation and intelligence gathering. Near the apartment building's main entrance, Rocky alerted to a specific location behind a maintenance shed. Adams followed his lead and discovered what appeared to be a small electronic device partially concealed in the landscaping. The device was sophisticated, a wireless surveillance camera with motion detection capabilities, positioned to capture everyone entering and leaving the building. "Good boy," Adams said, photographing the device in place before carefully removing it with gloved hands. How long have you been watching them? The camera's memory card contained weeks of footage, confirming that the Thompson family's surveillance had begun even before they filed their legal claim. Adams realized they were dealing with people who had anticipated the lawsuit and begun gathering intelligence in advance, a level of preparation that suggested resources and connections far beyond typical private investigation services. Rocky's continued search of the area revealed 2 additional surveillance devices, one positioned to monitor the apartment building's rear exit and another focused on the parking spaces where residents kept their vehicles. The placement was professional grade, designed to create comprehensive coverage while remaining virtually invisible to casual observation. The German Shepherd's scent detection abilities revealed the presence of at least 5 different individuals who had spent significant time in the area over the past several weeks. Rocky could distinguish between the building's residents, whose scent patterns were familiar and routine, and the newcomers. Surveillance operatives carried scents associated with expensive cologne, leather goods, and electronic equipment. These aren't random stalkers, Adams told Rocky as he continued his systematic search. These are professionals with expensive equipment and detailed operational planning. The dog's investigation extended to the Thompson family's specific apartment unit, where his sensitive nose detected evidence of unauthorized entry. Rocky alerted to the doorframe and windows, indicating that someone had spent time examining the apartment's security features, possibly testing for weaknesses or planning entry points. Most disturbing was Rocky's discovery of additional surveillance equipment that had been placed inside the apartment building itself. A tiny listening device had been concealed in the hallway near the Thompsons' door, positioned to capture conversations and monitor their daily activities. The device was so small and well hidden that it would never have been discovered without Rocky's extraordinary scent detection capabilities. Adams realized they were looking at a surveillance operation that rivaled those used by intelligence agencies. The level of sophistication, the quality of equipment, and the systematic approach to intelligence gathering indicated involvement by professionals with significant training and unlimited financial resources. "This goes way beyond simple intimidation," Adams said, scratching Rocky behind the ears as he completed his sweep of the building. "Someone has invested serious money and professional expertise into monitoring this family." Rocky's behavioral patterns during the investigation provided additional insight into the nature of the operation they were facing. The dog's stress indicators remained elevated throughout the examination, suggesting that the scent signatures he was detecting carried markers associated with aggression and predatory behavior. His training allowed him to distinguish between benign surveillance and hostile observation, and everything about this situation indicated hostile intent. The final piece of evidence that convinced Adams they were dealing with a professional operation came when Rocky alerted to a specific vehicle in the apartment complex's visitor parking area. The car appeared to belong to a resident or visitor, but Rocky's reaction indicated it had been used by the surveillance team. When Adams ran the license plate, she discovered the vehicle was registered to a shell company with connections to private investigation services. "We're not just dealing with hired muscle," Adams realized as she compiled her initial findings. "We're looking at a coordinated campaign involving designed to intimidate witnesses and obstruct justice." The dog's exceptional abilities had uncovered a level of surveillance and intimidation that would have remained hidden from conventional investigation methods. As they prepared to follow the evidence trail to its source, Adams felt a mixture of professional excitement and personal anger. Someone with significant power and resources was using those advantages to terrorize an innocent family, including 2 young children whose only crime was seeking acknowledgement from their biological father. Rocky had given them the evidence they needed to fight back. Rocky's scent-tracking abilities led Detective Adams across the city in a pattern that revealed the sophisticated nature of the surveillance operation targeting the Thompson family. The German Shepherd's nose had identified a unique combination of scents from the threatening note, expensive cologne mixed with printer ink and traces of leather that suggested high-end office environments. and he was following that trail with the determination of a bloodhound pursuing prey. The trail led through downtown business districts, past upscale shopping centers, and finally to a nondescript office building in the city's professional quarter. The building housed dozens of small businesses, accounting firms, consulting companies, and the kind of service providers that catered to clients who preferred discretion over publicity. Rocky's alert behavior intensified as they approached the third floor, specifically stopping outside Suite 314, which bore a simple placard reading, "Apex Consulting Services." The German Shepherd's body language indicated that multiple scent signatures from their investigation had converged at this location, suggesting they had found a central hub for the surveillance operation. Adams observed the office from the hallway while Rocky continued his investigation. Through the glass door, she could see typical office furnishings, desks, computers, filing cabinets, and what appeared to be sophisticated electronic equipment. But Rocky's reaction suggested this was far from a typical consulting business. The building's security office proved helpful when Adams presented her credentials and explained she was investigating harassment and illegal surveillance. The security manager, curious about the impressive German Shepherd, was eager to assist with their investigation. "Suite 314, the manager said, consulting his records. "Apex Consulting. They moved in about 6 months ago, paid a full year's rent in advance, cash. Very quiet tenants, work odd hours, lots of reported." "There," Adams pointed to a clear image of the SUV entering the garage. "Same license plate, same tinted windows. We've got them." But Rocky's investigation of the garage area revealed something even more significant. The dog's scent detection led them to a specific parking space, where his training indicated the presence of surveillance equipment and multiple individuals who had handled the threatening materials sent to the Thompson family. The building's dumpster provided additional evidence when Rocky alerted to discarded materials that contained the same scent signatures. Adams recovered fragments of documents that had been shredded but not completely destroyed, including what appeared to be surveillance logs detailing the Thompson family's daily routines, work schedules, and personal habits. One partially intact document made Adams' blood run cold: a detailed schedule of the twins' school activities, including their after-school program times, walking routes, and even notes about their favorite playground equipment. The level of detail suggested sustained observation by professionals who understood how to gather intelligence on potential targets. Rocky's continued investigation of the office building led to another disturbing discovery. In a utility closet on the same floor as Apex Consulting, the dog found electronic equipment that appeared to be monitoring devices, the kind used to intercept phone calls and record conversations from a distance. Adams realized they had discovered a sophisticated surveillance hub that had been used to monitor not just the Thompson family's physical movements, but potentially their private conversations as well. The equipment was professional grade and expensive, confirming that whoever was behind this operation had access to resources typically available only to law enforcement agencies or high-end private investigation firms. The breakthrough came when Adams obtained a warrant to examine the Apex Consulting office space. Rocky's scent-based evidence, combined with the surveillance footage and discarded documents, provided sufficient probable cause for a judge to authorize a search of the premises. Inside the office, they discovered a surveillance operation that exceeded Adams' worst expectations. Multiple computer monitors displayed real-time feeds from cameras positioned around the Thompson family's neighborhood. Filing cabinets contained detailed dossiers not just on Emma and the twins, but on their neighbors, teachers, and co-workers. Rocky's alert behavior led Adams to a hidden wall safe that contained the most damning evidence yet: contracts and payment records showing that Apex Consulting was a front company, a systematic campaign that went far beyond simple surveillance. The operation included plans for escalating intimidation, psychological pressure techniques, and even contingencies for more direct intervention if the Thompson family refused to abandon their legal claims. Rocky's investigation of the office space uncovered additional evidence that this wasn't Apex Consulting's first such operation. The dog's sensitive nose detected scent signatures from multiple other cases, suggesting that this firm specialized in intimidating witnesses and discouraging legal challenges to wealthy clients. Hidden in the office's bathroom, Rocky discovered a box of burner phones that had been used to make the anonymous calls to the Thompson family. The phones contained records of not just the calls to Emma, but similar harassment campaigns targeting other families in other cities. Adams realized they had stumbled onto something much larger than harassment of a single family. This appeared to be a professional service that wealthy individuals and corporations used to silence inconvenient legal challenges through systematic intimidation and psychological pressure. The final piece of evidence came when Rocky alerted to a specific computer terminal that contained encrypted files. When Adams' technical team cracked the encryption, they found detailed communication records between Apex Consulting and multiple law firms representing wealthy defendants in paternity, inheritance, and civil rights cases. "This is a criminal enterprise," Adams told her supervisor when she reported her findings. "They're selling intimidation services to people who want to make legal problems disappear without going through the court system." Rocky's extraordinary investigative abilities had uncovered a network of professional harassment that extended far beyond the Thompson family's case. The German Shepherd's nose for truth had revealed a systematic conspiracy to obstruct justice and intimidate witnesses on behalf of clients who could afford to purchase silence rather than face the consequences of their actions. As Adams compiled the evidence for prosecution, she realized that Rocky had given them something invaluable, proof that Marcus Whitmore and his legal team were willing to cross ethical and legal boundaries to prevent the truth about his abandoned children from becoming public. The hunter had become the hunted, and Rocky's nose for truth was leading them directly to the source of the conspiracy. Rocky's investigation skills reached their full potential when his scent tracking led Detective Adams to a self-storage facility on the outskirts of the city that asked few questions and accepted cash payments. Perfect for clients who valued discretion above convenience. Rocky's alert behavior intensified as they approached Unit 247, where his sensitive nose detected the concentrated presence of multiple scent signatures from their investigation. Adams obtained a warrant based on Rocky's evidence trail and the connections they had established between the surveillance operation and Marcus Whitmore's legal team. When the unit's roll-up door was raised, both detective and dog were stunned by what they discovered inside. The storage unit had been converted into a sophisticated filing and surveillance center. Multiple filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with what appeared to be case numbers and dates spanning over 2 decades. Professional-grade document storage systems contained thousands of files, photographs, and surveillance reports, organized with the precision of a law enforcement evidence room. Rocky's systematic examination of the space revealed that this wasn't just a storage facility. It was an archive of systematic intimidation campaigns targeting multiple families over many years. The dog's scent detection indicated that dozens of different individuals had been involved in creating and maintaining this operation, suggesting a level of organization that rivaled government intelligence agencies. The first cabinet that Adams examined contained files labeled Thompson Family Operation Silence. Inside were hundreds of photographs of Emma and the twins taken over several months, detailed surveillance logs, copies of their medical records, school files, and even psychological profiles that had been compiled by professional analysts. But this was just the beginning. As Adams moved through the storage unit, she discovered similar files for numerous other families: the Rodriguez family in Phoenix, the Chen family in Seattle, the Williams family in Atlanta, and dozens more. Each file contained the same type of comprehensive surveillance documentation, suggesting a systematic pattern of intimidation spanning the entire country. Rocky's behavior became increasingly agitated as he detected scent signatures associated with stress and fear throughout the storage unit. His training allowed him to recognize the chemical markers left behind by people who had been genuinely terrified, and those signatures were present on materials throughout the facility. The photographs in the various family files told a heartbreaking story. Adams saw images of children who looked remarkably similar to Sarah and Sophie, young faces that shared Marcus Whitmore's distinctive features. Neutralizing inheritance threats through targeted psychological pressure and sustained surveillance operations. The document was signed by the managing director of what appeared to be a professional intimidation service. Rocky's investigation of the storage unit revealed hidden compartments containing even more damaging evidence. Audio-visual equipment had been used to record private conversations involving the various families, with transcripts showing intimate details of their daily lives, financial struggles, and emotional vulnerabilities. The scope of Marcus Whitmore's systematic abandonment became clear as Adams examined file after file. Each family represented a woman who had been involved with Whitmore, become pregnant, and then been abandoned and monitored to ensure they never sought acknowledgement or support. The surveillance had continued for years in each case, with detailed reports tracking the children's development, academic achievements, and any signs that they might eventually discover their father's identity. Perhaps most disturbing were the files containing intervention reports, describing how various families had been discouraged from pursuing legal action through intimidation campaigns similar to what the Thompson family was experiencing. Several files contained documentation of families who had abandoned their legal claims after being subjected to sustained harassment and psychological pressure. Rocky's keen senses led Adams to a locked cabinet that contained the master files for the entire operation. Inside, she discovered financial records showing that Marcus Whitmore had paid millions of dollars over 2 decades to maintain surveillance on his abandoned families and fund intimidation campaigns when necessary. The records revealed a systematic pattern that was both calculated and cruel. Whitmore had not simply abandoned his children. He had actively worked to keep them in poverty, while monitoring their lives to ensure they never discovered the truth about their wealthy father. The surveillance reports showed that he had detailed knowledge of his children's struggles, their academic achievements, their health problems, and their dreams, but had chosen to remain hidden while they suffered. One particularly damning document outlined contingency protocols for dealing with families who couldn't be intimidated into silence through psychological pressure alone. The protocols included plans for more aggressive interventions, though the specific details were coded in language that would require expert analysis to fully understand. Rocky's investigation revealed evidence that the storage facility was just one of several similar abandonment and witness intimidation schemes in legal history. The German Shepherd's extraordinary abilities had led them to proof that Marcus Whitmore was not simply a deadbeat father who had abandoned inconvenient children, but the architect of a systematic conspiracy to deny his parental responsibilities while using his wealth to ensure his abandoned families could never seek justice. The breakthrough discovery transformed their understanding of the case from simple harassment to evidence of crimes that spanned decades and multiple jurisdictions. Rocky's nose for truth had uncovered a criminal enterprise that had operated in the shadows for 20 years, leaving a trail of abandoned children and terrorized families in its wake. Detective Adams knew that the evidence contained in this storage unit would not only protect the Thompson family from further intimidation, but would finally bring justice to dozens of other families who had been silenced by fear and systematic intimidation. The truth that Marcus Whitmore had worked so hard to hide was about to be exposed in all its calculated cruelty. Detective Sarah Adams spent the week buried in financial records so intricate and coldly engineered that they challenged her understanding of human cruelty. The evidence seized from the storage facility was more than incriminating. It was a roadmap to Marcus Whitmore's hidden empire, a web of offshore accounts, shell companies, and high-end services built to monitor and control the lives of his abandoned children. Working alongside forensic accountants from the district attorney's white-collar crime unit, Adams traced the architecture that had sustained Whitmore's surveillance operations for over 2 decades. What emerged was a masterclass in using wealth not to nurture, but to weaponize control. Offshore ledgers revealed accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg, feeding money into shell companies with names like Family Services Consulting and Child Welfare Research Group. The irony wasn't lost on Adams. Entities masquerading as champions of family welfare were, in reality, tools to destroy it. From these fronts, millions flowed to private investigation firms in 4 states. Surveillance intensity fluctuated depending on each family's threat level. Children who excelled academically or began questioning their origins triggered increased monitoring and more aggressive intimidation. The network went far beyond simple observation. Operatives infiltrated schools and neighborhoods, posing as researchers to extract confidential details from teachers and counselors. Mysteriously denied. Insurance claims stalled. Even scholarship recommendations for his children vanished without explanation. "Look at this," Adams told her partner, highlighting a cluster of transactions. Over $3 million last year alone on surveillance and interference. Proper child support for all his kids? Less than half that. The psychological profile was chilling. Whitmore hadn't just severed ties. He had designed a system to keep his children dependent and vulnerable, while tracking every struggle. He knew when they were sick, when they faltered in school, when they dreamed of more. Adams found files containing detailed psychological profiles, compiled without the children's knowledge, updated regularly to predict which might become a threat to his image. The most disturbing entries documented how he'd eliminated potential allies. When Emma Thompson applied for a hospital promotion, his operatives ensured damaging feedback reached her supervisors. When a child in Phoenix was nominated for an advanced academic program, the recommendation was abruptly withdrawn. Whitmore was less an absent father than an unseen puppet master, orchestrating decades of limitation. The financial records even revealed contingency plans for any child who discovered his identity: legal defense funds, media spin budgets, relocation services, all waiting in reserve. "He's been preparing for this exact moment since day one," Adams told her supervisor. Every dollar spent was about shielding himself from what's happening now. As technology advanced, so had his tactics, transitioning from hired eyes and ears to electronic monitoring, social media infiltration, and even AI-driven behavioral analysis. The files didn't just track his children, they mapped their friends, teachers, and would-be mentors. Anyone who might encourage or support them was quietly discredited or isolated. Surveillance reports documented the human cost. Children steered away from mentors, programs sabotaged, aspirations crushed. It was a slow-motion strangling of potential. Adams saw Whitmore for what he was, a new breed of criminal who used wealth to create invisible cages. His victims didn't realize they were being contained. They only felt an unshakable pattern of missed chances and inexplicable setbacks. Armed with names and addresses from the files, Adams began carefully reaching out to the other families he had abandoned and controlled. Each call was delicate. These women had lived under a whispered into the phone, her voice trembling with fear that had been cultivated through years of unexplained surveillance and interference. "I never told anyone. I kept the secret like I was supposed to." Adams spent over an hour on that first call, carefully explaining that she wasn't working for Whitmore, but rather investigating him. The revelation that other families existed, and that their experiences weren't isolated incidents, brought Maria to tears of relief and anger that had been suppressed for 15 years. "I thought I was going crazy," Maria admitted. "Every time I applied for a better job, something would go wrong. Every time Diego showed promise in school, opportunities would disappear. I started to think we were cursed, that God was punishing me for my mistakes." Similar conversations followed with women across the country. Jennifer Chen in Seattle had raised her 12-year-old daughter alone while working 3 jobs, never understanding why her career advancement always seemed to stall just as she was making progress. Lisa Williams in Atlanta had spent 8 years wondering why her son's medical specialist seemed to lose his files or become unavailable whenever treatment decisions needed to be made. Each mother's story followed the same devastating pattern. They had met Marcus Whitmore during periods of vulnerability in their lives, Some were recent college graduates struggling to establish careers. Others were recovering from difficult relationships or family tragedies. Whitmore had presented himself as successful, caring, and ready for commitment, showering them with attention and promises of a shared future. The pregnancies had been welcomed by these women, who believed they were starting families with a man who loved them. But Whitmore's reaction to the news of impending fatherhood followed an identical script in every case: initial shock, requests for time to process the news, and then gradual withdrawal that culminated in complete disappearance. He told me he had been offered a job opportunity overseas that he couldn't refuse, Jennifer Chen explained, her voice heavy with pain that hadn't diminished despite 12 years of distance. He said he would send for me and the baby once he was established, but I never heard from him again. When I tried to contact him, his phone was disconnected, his apartment was empty, and his employer claimed they had no record of him ever working there. The mother's attempts to locate Whitmore and seek support for their children had been systematically thwarted by what the settlements in exchange for signed agreements never to contact him or make public claims about their children's parentage. The agreements had been presented as generous offers to help struggling single mothers, but Adams recognized them as sophisticated legal instruments designed to prevent future paternity claims. They made it sound like I was lucky to get anything, Lisa Williams explained. The lawyer said most men in similar situations just disappeared completely, and I should be grateful that my baby's father cared enough to provide some support. I was 19, scared and alone. I signed everything they put in front of me. The emotional interviews revealed the psychological damage that Whitmore's systematic abandonment had inflicted not just on the mothers, but on their children. Many of the children had struggled with identity issues, behavioral problems, and academic difficulties that their mothers now understood might have been exacerbated by the subtle surveillance and interference they had experienced throughout their lives. Diego Rodriguez had been identified as gifted in elementary school, but had mysteriously been removed from advanced programs due to administrative errors that were never corrected. Sarah Chen had shown exceptional artistic talent, but had been repeatedly passed over for scholarships and opportunities that seemed perfectly suited to her abilities. The children had learned to accept disappointment as normal, never realizing that their failures were being orchestrated by their absent father. The mother's reluctance to come forward, even when presented with evidence of the surveillance they had endured, spoke to the effectiveness of Whitmore's intimidation strategies. Years of subtle interference and unexplained obstacles had trained them to expect retaliation for any attempt to seek justice or acknowledgement. "I want to help," Maria Rodriguez said during her second conversation with Adams, "but I'm terrified of what will happen to Diego if I speak out publicly. We've survived by staying invisible. What if making noise brings worse problems than we've already faced?" Adams understood their fear, but she also recognized the power that these mothers and children represented collectively. Individually, they had been vulnerable to Whitmore's wealth and influence. Together, they constituted a pattern of systematic family abandonment that would be impossible for even the most skilled legal team to explain away. The detective's investigation revealed that Whitmore had fathered at least 12 children across 7 different families, with the youngest being only 5 years old and the oldest approaching 18. Each child had opened a door that Whitmore had spent millions of dollars and decades of effort trying to keep sealed. The truth about his systematic abandonment of multiple families was about to emerge, and no amount of wealth or legal maneuvering would be able to contain the scope of his deception. Rocky's continued investigation of the surveillance equipment discovered in various locations revealed a level of technological sophistication that impressed even the police department's technical experts. The German Shepherd's ability to detect electronic devices led Adams to hidden cameras, listening devices, and tracking equipment that painted a disturbing picture of Marcus Whitmore's obsessive monitoring of his abandoned children's lives. The surveillance technology ranged from simple audio recording devices hidden in public spaces frequented by the families to sophisticated GPS tracking systems that had been covertly attached to their vehicles. Adams discovered that Whitmore had maintained real-time knowledge of his children's locations, activities, and even conversations for years, without their knowledge or consent. Rocky's alerts led to the discovery of micro-cameras that had been installed in locations where the children spent time regularly: school playgrounds, library study areas, and even medical facilities where they received treatment. The footage captured on these devices revealed that Whitmore had detailed visual records of his children's physical development, social interactions, and emotional states throughout their childhoods. The most disturbing aspect of the surveillance web was evidence that Whitmore had used his detailed knowledge of his children's lives to actively interfere with their opportunities and support systems. Adams found documentation showing that he had possessed advanced knowledge of academic achievements, scholarship applications, and college admission prospects for each of his abandoned children. In one particularly cruel example, Adams discovered that Whitmore had received detailed reports about Diego Rodriguez's exceptional performance in a state mathematics competition. Instead of feeling pride in his son's achievement, Whitmore had arranged for the boy's scholarship opportunities to be systematically eliminated through anonymous complaints about his eligibility and character references that were mysteriously withdrawn. The surveillance reports contained intimate details about the children's emotional struggles with their father's absence. Whitmore had recordings of conversations where his children expressed confusion about their identity, pain about not having a father figure, and dreams about someday meeting that might have improved their living conditions. When Emma Thompson had applied for child care subsidies that would have allowed her to work fewer hours and spend more time with the twins, Whitmore's operatives had ensured that her application was denied due to income discrepancies that existed only on paper. The psychological profiles compiled through surveillance revealed that Whitmore had detailed knowledge of each child's personality, strengths, weaknesses, and potential future paths. He knew which children were academically gifted, which ones showed artistic talent, and which ones struggled with emotional or behavioral issues. This knowledge had been used not to provide appropriate support, but to ensure that obstacles appeared whenever the children showed signs of transcending their circumstances. Rocky's investigation uncovered evidence of surveillance extending to the children's friends, teachers, and potential mentors. Whitmore had compiled detailed files on anyone who showed interest in helping his abandoned children, using that information to discredit positive influences or create situations that would damage beneficial relationships. The surveillance web had captured moments of profound sadness and resilience that should have been private family experiences. Adams found recordings of Sophie Thompson writing letters to her supposedly deceased father, of Diego Rodriguez defending his absent father to classmates who teased him about being fatherless, and of Sarah Chen creating artwork that expressed her longing for paternal connection. Perhaps most disturbing was evidence that Whitmore had used surveillance to monitor his children's medical needs while refusing to provide support for their health care. He had detailed records of dental problems, vision issues, and developmental concerns that could have been easily addressed with proper medical care, but had chosen to observe their suffering rather than provide assistance. The technical analysis of the surveillance equipment revealed that Whitmore had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in maintaining real-time monitoring capabilities that would have allowed him to track his children's activities with the precision of intelligence agencies monitoring foreign operatives. The system had been designed to provide comprehensive surveillance while remaining virtually undetectable to its targets. Adams realized that Whitmore's surveillance web represented a form of psychological control that was both systematic and deeply personal. He had positioned himself as an omniscient but absent presence in his children's lives, possessing intimate knowledge, had chosen to be a hidden observer of their lives, rather than an active participant in their development. Rocky's discoveries had uncovered not just a surveillance operation, but a systematic form of emotional abuse that had been inflicted on multiple families for decades. Whitmore had weaponized his wealth and technology to create a form of control that was both intimate and devastating, allowing him to play God with his children's lives while avoiding any responsibility for their welfare. Detective Adams understood that the surveillance web represented more than evidence of criminal activity. It was proof of a level of calculated cruelty that would be difficult for any jury to comprehend or forgive. Marcus Whitmore hadn't simply abandoned his children. He had created a system of control that ensured they would suffer, while he watched from the shadows, knowing he possessed the power to help them, but choosing instead to maintain his secret dominion over their lives. The morning air in courtroom 4B crackled with tension, thick enough to feel. Emma Thompson sat between her daughters, Sarah and Sophie, their small hands tight in hers, faces far too serious for 11-year-olds. Across the room, Marcus Whitmore, billionaire philanthropist, sat at the defense table, flanked by his legal army. His suit was flawless, but the restless drumming of his fingers betrayed strain. Victoria Whitmore occupied the front row of the gallery, dressed for the cameras outside. Her adult children sat beside her, projecting unity. They had spent weeks portraying the Thompsons as frauds. Now, everything hinged on science. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered with her usual punctuality. "We're here to receive the results of court-ordered DNA testing in Thompson versus Whitmore. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison will provide expert testimony." Dr. Morrison, a seasoned forensic geneticist, approached the stand. Her voice was steady as she read from her report. "Based on DNA samples from Marcus Whitmore and Sarah and Sophie Thompson, the probability of paternity is 99.97%. The courtroom seemed to freeze. Sophie's grip tightened. Sarah drew a sharp breath. Across the aisle, Whitmore's face blanched before his composure returned. "In practical terms," Morrison explained, "Marcus Whitmore is virtually certain to be the biological father. The chance of error is 3 in 10,000, statistically negligible or unreliable." He floated the possibility of contamination or deliberate manipulation, implying, without stating outright, that Emma might have engineered the results. Davidson, Whitmore's lead attorney, pushed further. "Is it possible unrelated children could be presented as Ms. Thompson's to create a false match?" Sterling nodded. "Theoretically, yes. Without verifying maternity, fraud can't be ruled out." They went further, producing a forensic psychologist, Dr. Patricia Webb, who had never met Emma, but painted her as a manipulative schemer, capable of training her children to lie. The attack was ruthless, eroding sympathy and planting doubt. Sophie withdrew into herself. Sarah's anger simmered. Judge Hendricks' patience thinned. The courtroom had become a battle of experts, each undermining the other. On the third morning, the judge dropped a bombshell. "Given the contradictory testimony and serious accusations, I have ordered independent verification by the FBI's forensic laboratory at Quantico." The room stilled. The FBI lab's reputation for accuracy was unassailable. Its results would end the debate. Dr. Jennifer Chen, director of the FBI's DNA analysis unit, testified next. "We conducted a completely independent analysis, using different equipment, techniques, and more conservative statistics. Our finding: Marcus Whitmore is the biological father of both Sarah and Sophie Thompson, with a probability exceeding 99.99%. Defense challenges faltered. Chen dismantled Sterling's criticisms one by one, explaining why each was unfounded. An unexpected detail bolstered the case. Rocky, a trained German shepherd, had been part of the chain of custody security. Detective Adams explained, "Rocky's training includes detecting biological evidence tampering. If samples had been altered, he would have alerted." The image of the attentive dog in court left jurors visibly impressed. With FBI confirmation in hand, Dr. Morrison returned to rebut Sterling directly. His criticisms show a misunderstanding of modern DNA analysis. Our procedures exceeded industry standards. His objections appear designed to confuse, not clarify. Then came the emotional core. Sophie, asked about experts claiming she might not be her mother's child, said quietly, It makes me feel like nothing about unquestionably the mother. Fabrication is scientifically impossible. Sterling's credibility crumbled under Chen's precise contradictions. The defense's conspiracy theories collapsed. Whitmore sat in silent defeat, the man who had spent millions to deny his daughters now cornered by irrefutable science. For Emma, the win was more than legal. It exposed the lengths Whitmore would go to erase his own children. Science had spoken with unassailable clarity. Sarah and Sophie Thompson were his daughters, and nothing, not wealth, not lawyers, not lies, could change that. The morning of Sarah's testimony dawned gray, matching the mood of the Thompson family. Emma had spent the previous evening rehearsing questions, calming her daughter's nerves, and helping her choose the navy dress she loved, the silver cross from Mrs. Rodriguez, and most tellingly, the fake military medal she'd treasured for years. "I want him to see it," Sarah said. "I want him to see what his lies looked like on me." At the courthouse, media cameras flashed, but Sarah's focus never wavered. In the prep room, attorney Jennifer Martinez reminded her she could pause or ask for water. Sarah shook her head. "I won't need a break. I've been waiting my whole life for this." When called, she walked with quiet authority to the stand, small in stature but commanding attention. "Can you tell us about the father you believed you had?" Martinez asked. Sarah described bedtime stories about a heroic soldier, Memorial Day cemetery visits, and holding the medal during storms. "We told kids our daddy died saving people," she said. "We tried to make him proud." Her voice hardened as she recalled seeing Marcus Whitmore on TV, alive and wealthy, accepting an award for family values. "While we ate cereal for dinner, he lived in mansions," she said, turning to face him. "Did you know we existed? Why weren't we good enough to have a father?" She accused him of watching their lives through hired eyes, knowing when they were sick, when they excelled, yet never sending so much as a birthday card. "I don't understand why you let us think you were dead instead of telling us the truth." Jurors and spectators sat in silence, many visibly moved. When her composure finally broke, Judge Hendricks called a recess. Sarah left without looking at Marcus again. Sophie's approached to the flowers and prayed. "We thought he was watching over us." When they learned he was alive, Sophie said, "I didn't know what to do with the letters. They weren't to him anymore. They were to nobody." Looking directly at Marcus, her tone was bewildered, not angry. "Why did you let me write to nobody? Even one letter back would have been enough." She spoke of praying nightly that God would tell him she loved him, hoping for a sign. "But you weren't in heaven. You just didn't want us to know you existed." Her last question hung in the air. "Did you ever wonder what we looked like? If we were happy? Did you ever think about us at all?" Emma's testimony shifted the tone again. No longer innocence, but a mother's controlled fury. She looked tired, the strain evident in her eyes and trembling hands, but her posture was unyielding. She recounted meeting Marcus 12 years earlier, charmed by his talk of family and philanthropy. "He was everything I thought I wanted," she said. "When I told him I was pregnant with twins, everything changed. He offered to pay for an abortion, then suggested adoption. When she refused, he cut off all contact, even hiring lawyers to warn her against reaching out. I was 22, pregnant with twins, and alone." She explained her choice to invent a heroic father. Better for them to mourn a hero than know they were rejected. The medal, the cemetery visits, they were props in a shield she built against the truth. Her voice hardened as she spoke of the surveillance. "He knew when they were sick, when they struggled, when they needed care we couldn't afford. He watched them suffer while he lived in luxury." She accused him of sabotaging jobs and scholarships. "I don't want his money," she said. "I want acknowledgement. I want him to admit Sarah and Sophie are his daughters, that they matter." Finally, she faced Marcus directly. "You robbed them of more than support. You robbed them of identity, self-worth, and the right to know where they came from. You forced me to lie to protect them from your cruelty. then accepted awards for caring about children while they believed you were dead. When she stepped down, the room was silent. Her words, like her daughter's, had reframed the case, not as a fight over money, but a demand for justice for children deliberately erased by the man meant to protect. Operation? Adams opened a folder labeled Operation Family Management, Comprehensive Overview. The sterile language masked something sinister. Whitmore had treated his own children as operational threats to be managed. Her investigation revealed he'd hired at least 15 private investigation firms across 7 states, spending over $8 million. The surveillance infiltrated every corner of his abandoned family's lives. Operatives posing as social workers, teachers, medical staff, even romantic partners for the mothers. These files contain medical records, school reports, psychological profiles, and predictions about each child's future, Adams said, holding up photographs of children who'd been monitored since birth. We found evidence of direct interference, jobs sabotaged, apartments lost, scholarships blocked. She played a recorded deposition from Michael Torres, a former PI. I thought it was a child welfare case, he said, voice heavy, but I was told to wreck this family's chances. Fake references, false safety reports, even car breakdowns timed to wipe out their savings. The goal was to keep them manageable and non-threatening. That's when I quit. Adams showed the pattern. Educational records altered, supportive teachers discredited, friendships broken by planted rumors. Internal emails referred to children as liability assets and mothers as containment challenges. One document outlined environmental pressure management, creating constant small crises, ambient stress, so families stayed too busy surviving to question their bad luck. These children grew up believing they were cursed or flawed, Adams said, but every failure was engineered. Then forensic accountant Patricia Chen took the stand. With the precision of her 20 years in financial crime, she unraveled Whitmore's spending. Over 22 years, she testified, he spent $12.7 million to avoid acknowledging his children, nearly triple what proper child support would have cost. The breakdown stunned the court. $8.2 million for PI services, $2.3 million for intimidation legal fees, $1.1 million for surveillance tech, and $1.1 million for environmental management. By comparison, supporting all his abandoned children would have cost about $4.8 million. Chen's charts revealed the contrast. Trust funds of $15 million each for Whitmore's 3 acknowledged children, calculated poverty for abandonment. Chen also revealed payments to psychologists to analyze surveillance footage of the children, not to help them, but to identify vulnerabilities for exploitation. He budgeted their misery as an ongoing operational expense. The judge's face hardened. In 23 years on this bench, I have never seen such calculated cruelty. Because Whitmore's intimidation network was still active, the court allowed remote testimony from other families. The first face was Maria Rodriguez from Phoenix, her 15-year-old son Diego in the background, his resemblance to Whitmore undeniable. 15 years ago, Marcus promised me marriage, Maria said. When I told him I was pregnant, he vanished. She described years of unexplained obstacles, better apartments falling through, job offers disappearing. Diego spoke quietly. I used to think something was wrong with me. I loved math but never got into advanced programs. Scholarships got lost. Teachers who liked me suddenly pulled away. Next was Jennifer Chen from Seattle, with her 12-year-old daughter Katie. Marcus had told Jennifer other women didn't understand his philanthropy, making her believe she was special. Katie's artwork displayed on screen was exceptional, but she'd been blocked from contests and programs so often, she began to doubt her talent. Maybe I was just imagining I was good, she said softly. Lisa Williams from Atlanta spoke of her 8-year-old son, Marcus Jr., whose medical treatments were sabotaged by insurance errors. Each testimony echoed the same pattern: love bombing, abandonment, and invisible sabotage that left children blaming themselves. Maria Rodriguez spoke for them all. "We thought we were alone. We thought our children's failures were our fault. Finding out we were designed to fail by the man who should have helped us, it's almost too much to bear." As testimony ended, the children's faces, speaking across states and time zones, formed a silent indictment. They were not coached voices in custody disputes, but raw truth. Kids bewildered that their father could watch them suffer when he had the power to change everything. Judge Hendricks, visibly moved, declared, "This is not neglect. This is a system built to harm. Mr. Whitmore created disadvantaged children while posing as their champion." The courtroom remained silent as the screen went dark. Marcus Whitmore sat at the defense table, no longer the confident public figure. Around him lay the evidence boxes, heavy with proof, heavier with the weight of 2 decades of stolen futures. The moment Marcus Whitmore had spent millions and 22 years avoiding arrived when Judge Hendricks compelled his testimony. The billionaire philanthropist, long lauded for speeches on family values, now had to explain under oath why he'd abandoned and surveilled his own children while they grew up in poverty. Gone was his former boardroom swagger. He moved hesitantly to the witness stand, aware that no sum could buy his way out of the evidence stacked against him. His lawyers had drilled him for days, but nothing could smooth over the questions ahead. "Mr. Whitmore," Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez began evenly, "can you tell the court about your relationship with Emma Thompson 12 years ago?" Whitmore's voice was thin. "We had a brief relationship that ended when it became clear we had different goals." Martinez's follow-up cut through the varnish. "Different goals? Or did it end when Ms. Thompson told you she was pregnant with twins?" He paused. The timing coincided with the pregnancy announcement. "Did you offer to pay for her to terminate?" "I offered to help with medical expenses," he said, his evasions falling flat. As Martinez rolled out surveillance files, financial ledgers, and internal memos, Whitmore claimed he'd acted to protect his family and reputation from exploitation. "Protecting?" she pressed. "By ensuring your children stayed poor while you watched from the shadows?" Shown footage of birthdays and school events, he insisted monitoring was to ensure proper care. "If concerned," Martinez asked, "why not simply acknowledge them and provide support?" "I had responsibilities to my legitimate family. I couldn't let mistakes destroy what I'd built." The phrase "mistakes" made jurors recoil. Emma Thompson audibly gasped. His attorney tried to reframe him as torn between 2 families, but Whitmore doubled down. Christopher, Madison, and Andrew deserved protection from scandal. Martinez's final question landed like a gavel. "You let Sarah and Sophie think their father was dead while you lived in luxury. How is that protection?" "I believed it better they have positive memories of a fictional father than the truth," he said. "So systematic surveillance and impoverishment was preferable to acknowledgement?" "Yes, walking to school in hand-me-downs, while their fathers spent millions spying on them." Even her adult children began to splinter. Christopher deleted supportive posts. Madison's online attacks on the Thompsons went viral for all the wrong reasons. Andrew publicly expressed sympathy for his half-siblings, saying, "I can't support actions that harmed innocent children who are my blood relatives." Detective Adams later testified that Victoria had personally hired extra investigators to target Emma Thompson's workplace and the twins' school. Records showed payments to pose as reporters, plant negative job references, and feed damaging stories to influencers. A recorded call sealed her role. "I don't care what it costs. My children's inheritance, my husband's reputation, everything is at risk because of some woman's children from 20 years ago." Her courtroom conduct turned combative. Gestures at Emma, muttered insults, twice removed for disruption. Judge Hendricks warned her about intimidating child witnesses. By the trial's final days, Victoria stood exposed as an active architect of the intimidation campaign, her social standing shattered. For the last time, Sarah and Sophie Thompson approached the witness stand together. Judge Hendricks had granted their unusual request to testify jointly. They dressed with quiet dignity, Sarah in her navy dress and the fake military medal once symbolizing their father's supposed heroism. Sophie in her best skirt and blouse, tissue box in hand but shoulders squared. Emma watched with pride and ache. These 11-year-olds had faced truths that would shape them for life. Their father was alive, wealthy, and had worked to keep them struggling. "Your Honor," Martinez said, "Sarah and Sophie wish to make a final statement to the court and their father." Sarah began. "For most of our lives, we thought our father was a hero who died serving his country. Finding out he lived and watched us struggle was heartbreaking." Sophie's voice was softer. "We're not angry anymore. We're sad about the years we lost, and confused why our father thought distance was better than knowing us." They spoke with clarity beyond their years. The DNA proof, the exposure of surveillance, the abandonment. These were legal victories, but what they sought was acknowledgement. "We didn't come for money," Sarah said. "We wanted our father to admit we exist, that we matter." Sophie turned to Whitmore. "We forgive you for leaving us. We forgive you for letting us think you were dead. But we can't forgive you for watching us struggle when you could have helped." Several jurors blinked back tears. Even Whitmore's lawyers looked uneasy. Sarah's final request was plain. "Publicly acknowledge us as your daughters. Let our half-brothers and sister know we exist. Maybe someday we can sense of their own worth." The packed courtroom for Judge Patricia Hendricks' final ruling pulsed with anticipation. Every seat was taken, overflow crowds filled hallways, and media trucks outside broadcast the case that had gripped the nation. Emma Thompson sat in the front row with her 11-year-old twin daughters, Sarah and Sophie, their hands linked in silent solidarity. Sarah wore the fake military medal, a reminder of the lies that had shaped their lives. Sophie clutched the small silver cross gifted by a neighbor. Across the aisle, Marcus Whitmore sat alone, his once formidable legal team reduced to one attorney. His wife, Victoria, absent for days, was rumored to be preparing divorce papers. Judge Hendricks entered, a thick folder in hand. She addressed the court with measured gravity. "In 23 years on this bench, I have never seen a case that so fundamentally challenges basic assumptions about parental responsibility and the lengths to which wealth can be used to avoid moral accountability." Her review of the evidence was methodical and devastating. DNA proved without doubt that Sarah and Sophie were Whitmore's daughters. Financial records revealed he had spent $12 million over 22 years to monitor them while ensuring they remained in poverty. This was not mere neglect, she said, but active cruelty designed to maintain psychological control. Hendricks' ruling was unprecedented. Sarah and Sophie were declared equal heirs to Whitmore's estate, entitled to trust funds matching those of his acknowledged children, retroactive child support, educational funding, and full medical coverage. The package, exceeding $3 million per child, was framed not as charity, but as overdue legal obligation. Most explosively, she referred the case for federal criminal investigation, witness intimidation, illegal surveillance, and conspiracy. The net could ensnare not just Marcus, but Victoria and the private investigators involved. Children have a basic right to acknowledgement, support, and freedom from systematic abuse, Hendricks concluded. The courtroom erupted in applause before order was restored. Outside, media swarmed as Emma guided her daughters away. Relief mixed with grief. The ruling secured their future, but could not return their stolen childhood. "Why doesn't it feel better?" Sophie asked quietly. "Because winning doesn't fix what was broken," Sarah replied. In the days that followed, Marcus's empire abuses. For Emma and the twins, healing was gradual. Family counseling addressed the trauma of betrayal. They moved to a better neighborhood. The girls enrolled in private school, and most importantly, they could now build their lives on truth. 6 months later, Sarah and Sophie sat in a law office, not as plaintiffs but as philanthropists. Using their trust funds, they launched the Thompson Family Foundation, to support single mothers and abandoned children fighting for legal recognition. Every child deserves acknowledgement and dignity, their mission statement declared. Sarah dreamed of becoming a lawyer like Jennifer Martinez to defend children against powerful abusers. Sophie, inspired by Detective Adams, joined the Family Crimes Unit as an honorary member, helping design programs for child victims. Their foundation's first major initiative, providing free legal representation in paternity cases, aimed to level the playing field for families without resources. Meanwhile, facing prison, Marcus cooperated with investigators to identify his other abandoned children, 14 across 9 families. Each received support, acknowledgement, and counseling. Legal scholars hailed Thompson Whitmore as a landmark case, reshaping inheritance law and child rights. Law schools taught it. Legislators proposed tougher penalties for systematic family harassment. Police departments nationwide adopted the Family Crimes Unit model, and programs began training dogs like Rocky to detect both evidence and emotional distress in child witnesses. As Sarah and Sophie prepared for 7th grade, they understood their journey was only beginning. They had entered the courthouse as forgotten children, but emerged as advocates whose courage had changed the law and offered hope to countless others. Their true victory lay not just in personal justice, but in proving that truth could outlast wealth, power, and decades of calculated deception, and in building a future where no child would have to fight so hard to be seen. Throughout this remarkable story of justice and courage, one of the most touching elements was the bond between Detective Adams and Rocky, her German Shepherd partner. Rocky's unwavering loyalty, gentle intuition with the traumatized twins, and brilliant investigative skills remind us why these magnificent dogs have earned such a special place in our hearts and homes. There's something profoundly moving about how Rocky could sense the children's fear and provide comfort when words weren't enough. With your own German Shepherd, you might enjoy exploring ways to deepen that connection even further. Many dog lovers have found wonderful resources that help them understand and communicate better with their loyal companions. Sometimes the most precious relationships in our lives are the ones that never need words at all.